I'm so proud of her for pronouncing my name properly. Wow. Lovely for all of you guys to have me. Thank you so much. Mine is a story of death and love, and how a community was built out of thin air that saved the life of a dying man and that of my own. It actually goes back to my childhood. My grandmother was one of the Parisian ladies who lunch. She so desperately wanted a girly girl granddaughter. Unfortunately, I was a bit of a tomboy. That's right. I refused to wear dresses. I liked to play with boys, collect frogs, climb trees. She was so frustrated with me. On my 4th birthday, she threw a party for me and insisted that after I had people who attended, I would write thank you cards to everybody that participated. And that really stuck with me, that act of gratitude. Now, fast forward to my 20s, when I really liked to play with boys. I found a vocation in law enforcement strategy at an organization that built statistical models and software solutions for governments all around the world. I traveled the globe and lived out of these 3 suitcases, helping solve crime with a group of individuals that was very elite, and I was very honored to work with them. Back then, most offices had this cool thing called a fax machine, for you younger people in the audience. A mobile phone looked like this, and the computers that we utilized looked like something out of a movie. I was working with some of the best and brightest minds around the world. People who are at the top of their game in research, statistics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, human factors, criminology. I mean, these people were PhDs 2 and 3 times over. MBAs. You know, we were building things like anti-terrorism models, legal software for the intelligence community. Think FBI, CIA, MI6, right? In our downtime, though, we got to know one another authentically in places such as chat rooms and in the walled garden of intranets. I learned the name of their spouses. I learned when they were giving birth to their first children, their interests, their political affiliations, what types of cars they were driving, what their hobbies were. We shared both the triumphs and tragedies of everyday life. I would send birthday cards and anniversary cards and bat mitzvah cards all over the world to my friends, my colleagues. We played online games and followed one another as we shared what we were passionate about on electronic bulletin boards, those that were available to us at the time. We found common ground and mutual respect. See, back then, there was no LinkedIn, there was no Snapchat, no Facebook, no Instagram. All the while, we were creating strong relationships with one another, and we were doing it virtually. It's called social capital. It's defined as the networks of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively. Here's a good example. While on an assignment in Georgia, I complained to one of my colleagues that I hadn't had decent French food in ages. And he was kind enough to recommend a place online. He said, there's this great French cafe. It's in a quiet city neighborhood in Atlanta. You'll love it. I was so thrilled to try this restaurant. The moment I walked in, I could see beautiful paintings of jazz musicians and posters. And on the menu, my absolute favorite, salade niçoise. The waiter was a tall, sort of attractive European-Asian mix of a man. And he was overly attentive. He came and asked me about my food every time I put a fork full of food in my mouth. At the end of the meal, I was eager to get back to my hotel, wanted to discover a little bit more about Atlanta, the city, and I asked for the bill. When it arrived, it had nothing but zeros. I thought, this is the oddest thing. I walked up to him, I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, you know, there must be something wrong. He said, no. He said, I took care of your lunch in hopes that you'll let me buy you dinner. And that's how I met George. George was an entrepreneur. He was well on his way to owning one of the hippest and coolest nightclubs in the country. They were mentioned in Esquire magazine. he got the opportunity to go to the Playboy Mansion. I mean, this place was the place to be in the 90s. Now, if you've never dated an entrepreneur, I have to tell you, there's nothing more romantic, in my humble opinion. I highly recommend it. There's nothing like seeing somebody's dream come to a reality. Ours was a lovely courtship, and soon I found myself moving to Georgia and becoming engaged. He was a cheeky fellow, yeah? Shortly after our engagement, and I was just so madly in love with this guy, I'm telling you, as far as I was concerned, he hung the moon. Shortly after our engagement, George got sick. He was diagnosed with something I couldn't even pronounce. I went to libraries. I tried to search things out in the online communities that were available to me. Finally, I shared my very personal situation, completely vulnerable, with my community. Unaware of what I was dealing with, I asked them for help. And before I knew it, they were offering to connect me with people all around the world. People that they'd known in university, people that they knew from the research communities, people that they graduated school with. By being completely vulnerable, I was welcomed into their private rolodexes. People they'd known for decades. One such gentleman was at Quantico, and he introduced me to somebody he went to school with. And I remember the beginning of the conversation was something like this. He said, I know the guy who's head of cancer research at MD Anderson in Houston. Do you want to meet him? Yeah. Soon George was properly diagnosed with advanced stage stomach cancer. And as George and I went through his illness together, we learned from my newly formed connections and friends about things like macrobiotic cooking, vegan diets, Chinese herbs, and Eastern and Western philosophies and therapies. And each time we tried one of these, I would let that person who recommended it know how we did. I would give them updates. I would write thank you cards in an act to just express my gratitude. My community had become Let me get back to this. My community had become an ecosystem, but it was my ecosystem. Thanks to my community, George lived another 4 years, until a misdiagnosis caused him to slip into a coma and pass in a matter of a few days. You see, dying is not a technical glitch of the human operating system. It's a feature. It's the only prediction we can make at birth that we can completely bank on. At the time, I would cry in meetings. Friends would call to check in on me, and halfway through a sentence, I would just break down in tears. Cancer and death are not easy topics to deal with. Couples we'd met throughout our courtship, people we'd go to dinner with, have movie nights with, and so on and so forth, stopped inviting me to things. I remember on one such occasion, a girlfriend called on a Thursday night to say, well, the Saturday night potluck supper, it's couples only. So I don't think it would be a good idea for you to attend. At times, the bereaved are often treated like those to whom something unnatural or disgraceful has occurred. People avoid them, don't invite them out, fall silent when they enter the room. The grieving are isolated when they most need community. And at this point, I felt as though every door was closed to me. So I created my own door. I was fearless, but scared witless at the same time. I had to muster up the courage. And this was really when I started to write. I began to write to those friends, telling them how much I missed them. And before I knew it, they shared that they missed me too. I began to become invited again to their events. And also, I wrote about my journey on electronic bulletin boards. I began to speak publicly about my experiences in building this community from colleagues, friends, friends of friends, and how they assisted me in helping George during the time of his illness. I talked about the power of connecting over topics, that topic becoming a social object, that social object connecting me to other people over another subject matter, and how ecosystems were beginning to crop up inside other ecosystems. How people would have very open and authentic conversations about things like the next car they were purchasing, or where they were sending their kids to school, or where they were traveling to on holiday, and if we knew any good restaurants. Before I knew it, people began to listen. So much so that it started me on a path, on my own journey, toward basically building the business that I'm in now, and it's a business that I love in digital marketing. My path in building community allowed me to build my own business, helping businesses both small and large harness the power of online communities, just to tell their own stories. Then in 2014, I had my own health scare. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Now, as an entrepreneur, the cost of the type of medical treatment that I needed was completely staggering. But it was the community I built on my own social capital who showed both kindness and compassion. To get me back on my feet again. In conducting my research for my day-to-day job, I ran across an article in the New Yorker by this man who I'd met once. He described how online communities and social networks created vacuous ties amongst people. Too superficial. Nothing could happen. I am here as living proof that Malcolm Gladwell was wrong. Communities both off and online are built on vulnerability. They're built on trust, authenticity, respect, social capital, courage, kindness, compassion, and most of all, gratitude. Today I stand before you some 18 years after George has passed, and 3 years after my own health scare, because I believed in the power of community. The journey to this TED Talk was shared with my community and of friends, of followers. And they lovingly took part in a campaign for me, supporting my good news. And I encourage you today to search on the hashtag Dorothéa's Good News. And you can see how my community reacted when I told them that my dream of giving a TED Talk had finally been granted. Thank you.